Washington, D.C. This is Khalid Jashan, Executive Director of Arab Center in Washington, welcoming you to another ACW webinar via Zoom, focusing on Israeli elections 2022 between fragile coalitions and extreme nationalism. As all of you know, Israel's legislative elections will be held in few days, 5 days to be precise, on Tuesday, November 1st, to elect 120 members of the country's 25th Knesset. This election will be Israel's fifth such elections in less than 4 years. It seemed to me there is a competition between the UK and Israel in terms of who gets more prime ministers in a limited period of time. But the Israeli election comes amid essentially electoral system's recurrent deadlock, political deadlock, in which the electoral blocs repeatedly are failing to reach or to maintain, as it did the last round, the 61 seats needed to secure a majority in the Israeli Knesset and to thereby form a functional and stable or lasting government. The latest public opinion polls, as of yesterday or this morning, actually, the polls results have not really budged much for several weeks now. The Netanyahu bloc seems to be staying ahead of Lapid's with about 3 or 4 seats. Remaining, as of this morning, I see 60 for the Likud bloc versus 56. Or so for the Lapid bloc, according to the Camille Fox polling for Channel 13. And as David Horowitz points out this morning in his column in the Times of Israel, next week's elections are impossible, he says, to accurately predict, no matter how ostensibly definitive the pollsters' findings tend to be. But the outgoing, short-lived, unprecedentedly diverse coalition headed by Yair Lapid seems to be consistently lagging behind Benjamin Netanyahu-led bloc of right-wing and ultra-Orthodox parties in all these surveys as you try to compare them with each other. Therefore, some analysts, both in Israel and beyond, and some pollsters even, predict yet another stalemate following next week's election, with Israel's politics remaining stuck between a potential governing coalition dependent on a fragile combination of small, diverse, and politically strange bedfellows on the one hand, or a combination of extreme right-wing Jewish nationalist or religious parties on the other. Arab Center Washington, D.C. is pleased to convene this panel of experts today to discuss the prospects for these elections, as well as its domestic and international implications. Panelists will focus on Israel's growing political gravitation to the extreme right, public frustration with the political gridlock for the past 3-4 years, and beyond, as a matter of fact, what I would call the Ben-Gvir-Smotrich syndrome, which is kind of, I mean, we've seen that trend before, but it seems to be kind of the new catchy new element in this particular election, and the Arab turnout, considering recent splits within the joint list. Speakers will also address the possibility that former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu might return to power, and the election's impact on Palestinian parties in Israel, on handling the Palestine issue more broadly in general for Israel, and on US-Israeli bilateral relations. To help us answer and decipher all these questions, we're very lucky to have with us 4 great speakers who are very, very experienced in Israeli politics and have been quite vocal about the developments the last few months in Israel, particularly with a focus on the elections and human rights. We're going to start with Gideon Levy, Gideon is a renowned Israeli author, journalist, and member of the editorial board of the Israeli daily newspaper Haaretz. His authoritative op-eds and columns focus often on human rights violation under Israeli occupation. In 2021, Gideon won the Sokolov Award, Israel's highly prestigious prize for outstanding journalism. After Gideon's remarks, we will go to Hiba Yazbek, a Palestinian politician in Israel, academic and sociologist. Hiba is a native of my hometown, Nazareth. Now, at least you know 3 people born in Nazareth. I won't go into detail, but she's also a former member of, a former Knesset member on behalf of Balad, التجمع الوطني الديمقراطي, and the Joint List, Al-Qa'ima Al-Mushtaraka, back in 2019-2021. Amal Jamal, a good friend of the Center, professor of political science at the School of Political Science, Government and International Affairs at Tel Aviv University. Amal serves as head of the Executive Graduate Program in Political Communication and co-editor-in-chief of Public Sphere Journal, an academic journal. And last but not least, our friend Orly Noy, editor, political activist, literary translator of Farsi poetry and prose, and chair of the executive board of B'Tselem, which is known to all of you, but I will mention that it's a Jerusalem-based NGO focused on documenting human rights violation in the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories. Each of our guests will speak for 10 to 12 minutes, and then we will have a question and answer session. We invite you, our audience, to engage with our speakers in the Q&A session. You might, if you have any questions during the presentations, feel free to go ahead and use the Zoom platform at the bottom of your page and send your questions. You don't have to wait for the Q&A. But then if you are watching us other than on Zoom, you might want to use the email by writing your question to events@arabcenterdc.org, events@arabcenterdc.org. And the questions will be directed to me, and I will be basically reading your questions and addressing them to the right speaker. Please, if you don't mind, identify yourself, your affiliation, be brief in your question, and target your question to specific speakers would make it a bit easier and more efficient use of our limited time during the Q&A session. Gideon is stuck in his car, as you can see, in the infamous traffic pattern in Israel today. And we are very, very glad to have you, Gideon. Appreciate the inconvenience of you having to speak to us from your car, but the microphone is yours. Go ahead. You have 12 minutes, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss serious things, because in Israeli media, it's almost impossible to discuss any serious issues concerning the coming elections. I would like to start and say that, in my view, the coming elections are much less crucial than people tend to describe them. By the end of the day, we are dealing with 2 candidates which almost stand for the same ideas. Israel is right-wing. Israel is hello? Yeah. I mean, we have to face the reality in which Israelis are much more close each to the other in their views. Namely, almost all Jewish Israelis are Zionists, define themselves as Zionists, which means they all stand for Jewish superiority between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. Having said this, it means that the differences are really small. Both Lapid and Netanyahu are in favor of continuing the occupation. None of them see the Palestinian people as having the right to equal rights. None of them believe in the possibility of any kind of peace, for sure not ending the occupation. And all of them, Lapid, Netanyahu, should be defined as right-wingers. They are right-wingers. Anyone who supports Jewish supremacy cannot be a leftist. And therefore, I claim for many years now, a few years now, that you can't be Zionist and leftist. It doesn't go hand to hand together. You have to choose. And those elections don't change anything in this view, because will it be Lapid or will it be Netanyahu? A Zionist will lead Israel, which means a supporter of the occupation will lead Israel, which means a supporter of the Jewish supremacy will lead Israel, which means someone who does not accept the Palestinian people as a people who should gain same rights like the Jews will lead Israel. The other differences are, in my view, minor. You see, it's time for all of us to realize that the occupation is a permanent phenomena. Let's stop calling it occupation, because occupation by its nature, by its definition, is something temporary. Our occupation is not temporary. It was never aimed to be temporary, but after 55 years, you can't claim it is temporary, because 55 years are not a temporary period. This leads us to the conclusion that if it's not temporary, if it's permanent, it means that this defines the regime of Israel. The occupation defines the real system of Israel, the real regime of Israel. In other words, we are dealing with an apartheid state in which part of the citizens are going to participate in the elections next Tuesday, half of them. Half of the inhabitants are banned from those elections. So what kind of elections are they? Those are the elections among the white community in South Africa, which were also democratic elections, free elections. There were all kinds of parties in South Africa, all of them only for the whites. Now all the parties are Jewish, except of 3 Palestinian parties, but they can reach out only a very small Palestinians who live under Israeli control. Therefore, I would say that these elections
Zoom webinars suffer from, I guess, the same excitement of live TV until we restore the connection with Gideon Levy. Let's go ahead and move to the next speaker. Hiba, if you don't mind activating your microphone. And again, the next speaker would be Hiba Yazbek, a Palestinian politician who is a former member of the Knesset on behalf of Balad and Joint List. She is an academic, a sociologist by profession, and she will be discussing more what Gideon just referred to, the Palestinian Arab parties in Israel with the recent, I guess, tensions emanating from some splits within the Joint List and the implications. And particularly, I would appreciate it, Hiba, if you could focus on the tendency in a lot of the Israeli media and pro-Israel media out here in the States, for example, as if the Arab vote has a responsibility to rescue Israel from its current predicament. How do you and your colleagues, your fellow Arabs in Israel feel about that? Is it your responsibility to rescue Israel from its own foolishness?
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure to take part in this important webinar and to share my thoughts with all of you. Okay, so we are dealing with the 5th elections during about 3 years in Israel. And let's make the long story short. We could find ourselves in the sixth election after a couple of months. So, because the situation that we are seeing, the complicated situation that that's going on in the meanwhile in Israel, that the two blocks, the two camps, the Netanyahu camp and the changing Netanyahu camp, they both cannot until this day, according to the polls, according to the service, until this day, they cannot really have our forum or build a coalition. But if we want to look a day after the election, or Tuesday, we have two, let's say, strong and main options. First option, either Netanyahu or Lapid, or maybe Gantz even, can form a coalition. And this will lead us to another immediate election, okay? And in a half a year maybe. And the second option that also could be, according to the recent polls, that Netanyahu will manage to form such a government, and he can have a coalition. But this will be a very, very, very narrow coalition, a coalition that depends on the religious parties and on the extremist, fascist, settler party such as Utzma Yehudi, that we see that it's growing, it's gaining power. We are talking about 13 to 15 seats that this very small and should be and small and extreme and fascist a party in Israel. So we are talking, and this is horrible actually, that this skin in Israel, that we are seeing the growing and the raising of the extremist, of the fascist atmosphere and the fascist parties that is growing inside Israel, and Netanyahu depends on them. But if he could really have this government, this will be a very narrow government that will lead as well to a very early elections as well. So, of course, all of this political situation also affects the status and situation of the Arab citizens inside Israel, the Arab Palestinian citizens, and for sure it also influences their political participation and they're willing to go to vote. So as we can see that until these days, we are talking about a very, very low voting turnout. We are talking about only 46%, which means it will be a very low rate. And I want to propose here, before I get to the end, I want to propose here what's going on. Why we are talking about a very low percent among the Arab of voting among the Arabs in Israel. And I want, please, just to talk about two patterns maybe. In one hand, there is the general governmental policies, and in the other hand, there is the internal political Arab parties' visions and behavior. Okay, so first, regarding the general governmental politics by Israel, these politics still see the Arab citizens as marginalized governmental policies. Even the change, the so-called the change government of Lapid and Bennett, we have seen that this government also deepened the occupation, deepened the discrimination, deepened the racist atmosphere in among or towards the Arabs in Israel and towards the Palestinians in general. So we are talking about government that only to change persona by persona, to change Netanyahu by Lapid or by Bennett, and not to change the policies, and which is influence also the or disappoint. It's more disappointing for the Arab citizens inside Israel. So we are talking about a coalition examples in that regard. We're talking about racist legislation that restricts fundamental human rights, such as banning the reunification of Palestinian families. We are talking about criminalization of Palestinian civil society and his organizations and youth groups in the West Bank. We are talking about decisions to build up about 3,000 settlement units in the occupied West Bank. And we remind here that this violates the international law. So we are talking about a government that is still and continues not to respect the international law. Moreover, among the Arab citizens in Israel, we are talking about a government that failed to address the very, very main issues such as and problems such as education, health, welfare, housing, and more. And of course, the main problem of violence and of crimes in the Arab society. We didn't see that this government of Lapid and Bennett government have any solution and have any governmental decision in order to confront this this very painful problem among the Arabs in Israel. That and more, the change government destroyed buildings and houses and homes in the Naqab, in the Negev, more than any other government. So if we want to talk about change, about hope, okay, in Israel, we cannot find it in this government. They don't give any hope to the Arab, to the Palestinian citizens in order to get out and to take part in that and to influence and to have and to take part in the political participation. So actually, the current Israeli government has brought no change, but rather a continuation of colonial, of apartheid policies, and of ongoing discrimination against the Arabs in Israel. These politics actually and these policies influence the Arab citizens' aspirations and affect their political participation, including voting. And the current government have showed to us that the only change, as I have said before, is just to change Netanyahu, the person. There's no one here is speaking about any peace process, any opening any negotiation, ending occupation, equality, democracy, promoting any liberal values. No, the idea here is only to change Netanyahu the person. And this leads me to the second level that is essential in understanding the Arab society frustration, which is the internal, actually, Arab politics. As no doubt that the split and the fragmentation of the joint list that included the four active Arab parties among the Palestinians in Israel led to a disappointment. We know that the people are very disappointed because of this split, and we know that people have seen the joint list as a piece of hope, let's say, as a list that can confront, as a list that have more power to talk by their name and to take to talk their voice as well. And we know that this split was really disappointed for people, and frustration, and we have seen that in the last election. We have seen that people as well didn't go and didn't vote, and that's why we have went down only to 10 Knesset members in the in the last election, and this joint list was totally break up in these elections when the two left parties in the list, the Communist Party, Al-Jabha, and Arabiya Al-Taghir, Arab Changing Party, choose to run together without the Balad, the NDA party, the National Democratic Assembly, that is running alone. So we are talking about three parties with Al-Muwahhadi, the Islamic parties, that are running in the Arab society in these days. And this means that today we have a competition as well on the vision and the political vision between the Arab parties in the Arab streets. We are talking about the main discussion is about what does it mean to be influential inside the Knesset, and how you should influence as Arab parties in the Knesset. In one hand, or in one side, we can see the Al-Muwahhada, the Islamic party, that want to be a part of the coalition and of the government, even in the price that it is a government of occupation, and they want to be part of any possible government that accepts them. On the other hand, you can see in the same side as well Al-Jabha and Al-Taghir, that Hadash Bita'a, that they want as well to influence, but by their own vision, which means to name and to recommend and to vote for the Prime Minister, even in order to ban Netanyahu to form a government. And on the other side, you can find the Balad, or the NDA party, Tajammu', that have the vision of a state of all its citizens and a national and civil rights, but inside the opposition, that we don't go to a coalition, and we don't want also to be part of the game of the recommendation of the Prime Minister, because we know it's only would cost us, and we will need to just to give up and not to have any rest, especially that we are still talking about again changing a person and not changing agenda or changing any policy. So this discussion is very much is very relevant, let's say, nowadays in the Arab street, between the visions of the three parties, and between the between the three parties. And in the same time, we have the challenge as well to make people go and vote, and to make people feel that there is a hope, there is a hope of influence, that each party can see, okay, by each party. So we know that we have a very hard mission, let's say, in this election, because we feel the frustration and we feel that disappointed in the Arab street. People feel that they cannot, in one hand, because of the Israeli governmental policies, they cannot really influence what is happening, but in the other hand also they wanted to have a democratic national, a big, a wide union that can defend their rights and that can talk their voice, and they don't have it anymore. They actually now they have the three parties again, and they need to go and to choose again. And it seems that it's a very hard mission for the Arab voters to do again and again, especially that we are talking about the fifth election during 3 years, which is something that is making people feel tired of this ongoing election and ongoing plunder and ongoing that they don't see any horizon. So I think that one of the main things that the Arab, or one of the main challenges that the Arab parties have in this election is really to make the people go and vote and participate and give them hope because we said seriously that if the Arab citizens won't vote in this election, this will form a real threat that all or some of the Arabs won't pass. Yeah. won't pass and won't be represented in the Knesset. So that's why in these days we really work hard to convince people to go out and to vote.
Thank you, Hiba. I know that you need to leave a little bit early because of other professional commitments pertaining to the campaign. We respect that. We would like for you to do that. Just wanted to ask you, with regards to this last point you just made, the turnout. The turnout is going to be key for all kinds of reasons, for the community itself, the Arab community, and beyond. I shared with you earlier before we started the recent survey by the Israel Democracy Institute showing that 69.9% of Israel's Arab citizens responded that they are certain or that they think they are going to vote regarding the turnout. This number seems to be too exaggerated as far as I'm concerned. What's your expectation in terms of the actual turnout and your comment on this particular survey?
Yeah, I think that there is a big difference between people who think that they want to vote, and between people who go and vote in real time in the election day. And I think that this is a very high percentage, let's say, and turnout. But I think that the turnout will be low, but I hope that we will receive at least a 50%, a turnout of the Arab voters that can go and can vote in the election day. Otherwise, we will have a real threat that we are all concerned about the future of the Arab representation in the Knesset. And of course, sorry
sure.
that there's the time is very limited, but I think that what is happening now is just like a red light that the Arab leaders and the Arab parties, including Balad, need to think again and again about how to give hope to people and how to organize the Arab and the political doing and the political activity in order to give people hope and to give people more chance to take part and to participate on the political life in general inside Israel.
Looking at the elections from the outside, I'm surprised a bit by the number of analysts, both some who have a decent attitude toward the Arabs in Israel and some who do not, actually, are not very friendly to the presence even of Arabs in Israel, somehow expecting so much from the Arab vote, as if the Arab vote is going to rescue Israel from its current political predicament. How do you feel as a politician among the Arabs in Israel about this expectation? Is it fair to expect that from you?
I think that it's not only not fair. I think it's also not the reason why we want or why Arab Palestinian citizens must go and vote.
Mm-hmm.
The Arab Palestinian people voters go and vote because they want representative that talk their own issues, their own identity, their own pain, their own civil and national rights and demands. So to treat the Arab voters as a group of voters that their mission now is to go and to rescue the Israeli plunder, the Israeli complicated the political situation, I think it's not fair and it's not true actually, because what we are seeing in these days that the discussion in the Arab street is exactly about this, about how to influence inside the Knesset. And what does it mean to influence inside the Knesset? Or what does it mean to be a member in the Knesset, and why we should be why we should have a Arab national democratic parties inside the Knesset that can represent us, and not inside the coalition, for example, okay, and not inside the inside the government, for example. So I think that the one who thinks that the Arabs will really rescue the Israeli very complicated political situation, he's just dreaming, because it's not the situation at all.
Thank you so much, Hiba. I appreciate your participation in this panel with us, and good luck to you and your other activities. And again, best wishes to you and to the Arabs in general in Israel with regards to the election. Thanks again. Gideon, we're back to you. You look great in your office. Thank you. And we give you back the balance of your time. So I think you still have about 7 minutes or so. You spoke half of the allocated time. So the microphone is yours again. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I'm so sorry about the interruption.
No problem.
But thank you. I was about to say that those elections in Israel are in a way part of this masquerade, namely that Israel is a democracy and everyone has equal rights and everyone participates in the elections. But that's a masquerade. If we go to the West Bank and we see two villages, one next to the other, one village would participate in the elections in 6 days, and the other village is totally banned from those elections. What kind of elections are they? What kind of democracy is it? Can you define it as a democracy? I mean, Amal is an expert for political science. I would love to hear from him. Can this be defined as a democracy? That looks like apartheid, walks like apartheid, and is apartheid. But in this framework, we have to see also that the discourse in Israel toward the Palestinian parties, especially in this campaign, was so shameful this time, maybe more shameful than in the past, because all the politicians from all the parties were competing one the other, who is going to take more distance from those Palestinian parties. Every interview with every member of parliament from the left and from the right, the first or second question would be, would you go with them? And the answer will always be, no, no, God forbid, we'll never go with them. And this has a very deep meaning because it shows how deep is the racism. It's not about their political attitudes. It's not about their political attitudes. It's about their identity. And their identity is not yet legitimized. They are still perceived as an enemy, not as part of us. Now, why would they feel part of us? Israel declares itself again and again, and especially in the last years, as the state of the Jewish people, or the Jewish state. I want to ask you, Khalil, what would you feel to live in a country in which you are excluded officially, not by certain groups, but by the state? The state says this is a Jewish state, which means all those who are not Jewish are not part of the game, or at least not equal partners. So after having all this, you expect the Palestinian citizens to go to vote? I wrote an article today claiming that in an ideal world, which we are not in, all the Israeli Palestinians should have banned those elections until all their brothers under the occupation get the same rights like them, namely the right of vote. I'm not ready that I, who live in Nazareth, can vote, and my cousin who lives in Jenin, which is half an hour away from my home, has no right like this. We are both living under the Israeli regime, under the Jewish Israeli state. But that's really too much to expect. I wouldn't expect the Israeli Palestinians to sacrifice so much because it's also about their destiny. But the minimum should be to change the discourse, because what is at stake now is Palestinian voters, come and save us, we, the Zionist left. We depend on you because otherwise Netanyahu will come and he will be so much worse than we. So first of all, I'm not sure that Netanyahu is so much worse than they. Let's remember that all the real crimes against the Palestinian people were committed, first of all, by labor, first of all, by Zionist left. Netanyahu only completed the picture. They are the founding fathers of the settlement project. They are the founding fathers of all the wars. They are the founding fathers of the siege over Gaza. And they are running now a government which shows on a daily basis that there is no difference. Go to Nablus now and see what's going on in Nablus and tell me what's the difference between one government or the other. Netanyahu wouldn't do worse than this. But now, because they are needed, because the Zionist left is so eager to get back to power or to stay in power, they are begging, all of a sudden they reveal the Palestinian voters and they are trying to frighten them that if they will not vote, if they will not participate, there will be a terrible, terrible punishment for them. So I have news for my friends in the Zionist left. The Israeli Palestinians are in bad shape in any case. And this government didn't improve the situation at all. And they are part of the Palestinian people who is now in one of its worst times ever since 1948. I think the Palestinian people, I will not get into it now because it's not the right framework, but I think today the Palestinian people is in its lowest point ever since 48.
Yeah.
Bleeding, lonely, lacking leadership, isolated, delegitimized, the world lost interest, the Arab world lost interest, and so forth and so forth. In this framework, to come and to ask the Israeli Palestinian voters to come to vote to save the Zionist left is what we call in good Hebrew chutzpah. It's an enormous chutzpah to ask it, which does not mean that the Israeli Palestinians shouldn't go and vote. They should do it, but for their own sake, namely only for non-Zionist parties. I think that no Palestinian voter, I would say, even have the right to vote for a Zionist party. How can you vote for someone who tells you, I'm supreme on you? You are not equal to me. And there are so many who do it, and I could never understand it, never understand it. It's one thing to go together to try to find some common language, and it's another thing to surrender and to lose your dignity. In any case, I hope that all the Arab parties will do it. I just on the way here got very disturbing news about the joint list. I understand there are very bad polls and there is a real danger. I also talked to Ahmad Tibi 2 days ago. There is a real danger that they will not pass. And then if this will happen, God forbid, then we will have an ethnic, clean parliament, only Jews in the parliament. This might happen. I don't think it will happen, but the danger is there. It will show the world something about Israel democracy, but it will be a catastrophe for the Israeli-Palestinian community who still is struggling for most basic rights, namely equality.
Thank you, Gideon, for this very provocative but very informative and certainly reflective of the reality on the ground in Israel as far as Jews and Arabs in Israel are concerned. I'm sure there will be some further issues to clarify with you during the Q&A session, so we appreciate you staying with us for that. At this point, we move to Professor Amal Jamal to help us answer some of these questions that we have raised earlier with regards to both Israeli society's shifting, if you will, politics to the extreme right, and also with regards to the Arab issues for the different Arab parties, particularly in light of the danger that Gideon just referred to, that the possibility that one of the other remaining parties, Arab parties, will not be able to pass the threshold, which would be, I think, definitely tragic. But go ahead, Amal, the microphone is yours, please.
Well, Khalil, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me and for the opportunity to say a few things about what's going on. Yeah, it is a limbo. It is a very, very complicated reality. I don't think, I mean, it's possible to reduce it into clear pattern. And despite that, I think politics is about sociology. And we have to understand the sociology if we want to understand how things are developing and why they are developing the way they are doing so. And, you know, Israeli society has been changing in the last few decades. And one of the major changes is the rise of the national religious community and the nationalization of the ultra-Orthodox community. And the rise of a political camp that represents, although it conceives itself as you know, religious national, it still seeks to occupy the center of the political system in Israel, and it has been investing a lot in this in the last couple of decades, and they managed actually to occupy the communication system. We see them overrepresented actually in the communication system. This means also having more access to determining the political discourse and the nature of the debate in the communication system, given that the average citizen gets her or his news from the communication system. The sense is that they have managed to occupy actually the center of power. If power is, you know, articulated in the communication system and in the public sphere, I think, and I'm saying this because we have to notify that a large part of those supporting Smotrich and Ben Gvir, which is the right-wing fascist party, are youth from the big cities in Israel, not only from the periphery of the country. This means that they managed to occupy a growing number of spaces in big cities. I happen to be in Tel Aviv giving a talk at a school today, Jewish school today, and you should see what kind of support Ben Gvir has among the most privileged Jews you can think of in Tel Aviv, in Israel entirely. This means that there is a shift, there's a sociological shift that we have to take into consideration, and the reduction of the political discourse into friend and enemy, utilizing, you know, a very reductive language of black and white, either you are with us or you are against us, a language that has been adopted not only by Netanyahu's camp, but also by the, you know, center-left camp, specifically by Benny Gantz and his people, who was actually given the chance to form a government back in 2019 by the Arab parties, and got cold feet at the time. This means that there is a shift in the Israeli society that we have to take into consideration, and therefore the support for the you know, center parties and the right-wing parties is the name of the game. And as Gideon said and Hiba said before, these parties don't differ very much when it comes to the major issues that concern us here. Mainly any future vision of the state of Israel. What kind of Israel these parties want to have in the future? When you really examine the political discourse and put down the marginal issues and concentrate on the strategic points, you see that the differences are not much different. Any vision of Israel for the future is almost the same. No treatment of the occupation, no withdrawal of the Israeli army from the West Bank, no end of the siege on Gaza, no change in the status of the Palestinian citizens of Israel. The patriotic spirit of the Jewish society is the name of the game, and therefore, we don't see much change. Now, having said that, I cannot but actually somehow put a comment here, a big footnote, that there is still a difference that we have to take into consideration. And I think we have to notify if we want really not to frustrate everybody listening to us today. And that is, there is still a chance for a liberal voice to criticize, voice out actually a critique on the developments taking place in Israel. Israel has an international standing that is very important to its economy and to its international relations. And therefore, I think managing to give a chance for those voices to be outed in order to not to propagate the right-wing position, but actually to let people know worldwide that these processes are taking place in Israel and that there is a role for the international community to take in order to guarantee at least that Israel is scrutinized, Israel is treated like any other state worldwide and not given the support it has been receiving despite the occupation, despite the siege on Gaza, despite the discrimination, despite the racist discrimination against citizens, and so on and so on. So I think this is an important issue to put on the table, despite the fact that, as I said, that the picture is not that optimistic. Having said that, I think we have to move ahead one step further and say that the name of the game in Israel is procedural democracy, in the sense it's not a substantial democracy. Israel has decided to follow what Ali ibn Abi Talib had said hundreds of years ago. I'll say it in Arabic and translate, Khalil. لا تكن طريا فتعصر ولا تكن قاسيا فتكسر. Don't be too soft to be squeezed, and don't be too hard to be broken. I think this is the answer that has to be put on the table for those who don't understand how Israel is able to propagate itself as the only democracy in the Middle East and still having millions of people without political rights for 55 years since the occupation in 1967. Israel is playing the game very sophisticatedly, and we have to take that into consideration. The issue is that there is, the Jewish community, which is the sovereign in Israel, not the Israeli citizens are the sovereign, the Jewish citizens are the sovereign, have decided to play the game of procedural democracy in order to win international support, and in order to show that Israel is an enlightened, liberal country in the Middle East. Now, is this substantially true? Of course not. But still, and here I come to my next point, the Palestinian leadership in Israel has decided since 1948-49 to play the game. And playing the game means participating in the elections. Now, between 1949 and 1966, they didn't have any choice because they were living under military occupation and they were afraid to be deported, expelled from the country, and that's why they had to show allegiance to the Israeli political system. Since 1967, which means the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, there's no military occupation inside Israel in Arab areas, and still the Arab-Palestinian leadership decided to participate in the game. And I think there is no one minority worldwide that did not exploit any opportunity possible in order to promote its political rights and defend its position in a political system, which means the participation of the Palestinians, citizens of Israel, in the political game does not mean that they comply or accept or legitimize the Israeli claim that we are talking about a substantial democratic game. They participate because it's one of the fields in which they can articulate their voice and can actually have the opportunity to have an immunity in order to say anything possible, which is not allowed for the average citizen, or an average citizen won't dare say. Opening this space of political articulation, I think, is very important. Now, having said that, I have to add one more point, and that is that in the last 3-4 decades, we are talking about also a sociological change in the Arab-Palestinian community in Israel, and that is the rise of a middle class. There is the rise of a middle class in the Arab community, and this middle class in nature is pragmatic. Is pragmatic and differentiates, and sort of here being brief on this topic, but this middle class differentiates between mere representation in the parliament and having an impact on the political system. Meaning that it's not enough for this middle class that they are represented in the Knesset and that people have a voice only. They want to have a change happening in the political system, and they will somehow exploit any opportunity to seize this option. And therefore, they expect their leadership not only to speak and to have the ability to be members of the parliament, but also somehow find a way, and I say it, in this, I formulate myself this way, because there are different formulas to translate it, find a way to have the most impact possible on decision-making. Doesn't mean necessarily being part of the coalition. It doesn't mean necessarily being part of the government, but it means definitely having the ability somehow to change the course of the ship and exploit any opportunity possible to influence decision-making in such a way that serves the interests of the Palestinians on two main topics. One, solving the Palestinian problem, meaning finding a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, forming a Palestinian state, or pushing Israel to determine whether it wants two-state solution, wants one-state solution, or an apartheid reality. Push Israel as much as possible there. Push the Zionist parties to determine their opinion and make a decision in this regard. And the second is actually make them, push the Zionist parties to also decide if they really want Israel to be a democracy, a real democracy, a substantial democracy or not. Because a substantial democracy does not differentiate between citizens based on identity. It doesn't allow a racist discourse to be at the center of the political game, and so on and so on. So I think Arab representatives are expected from their own community, their own constituency, to be more creative when it comes to playing the game. They want them to oppose sidelining the Palestinian problem by the political parties, by the Zionist political parties, as if it doesn't exist. And that's a trend that has been happening in Israel in the last couple of decades, led by Benjamin Netanyahu and his supporters, that as if the Palestinian problem does not exist. And I think sticking to this point that we are part of the Palestinian people and there is no solution, that Israel cannot be a democratic state and without solving the Palestinian problem. And the second issue, that we want to be part of the game in the sense that we want to be part of the sovereign, Khalil, and this is very important. Not only being part of the parliament, but being part of the sovereign. The sovereign, the civic sovereign, not the ethnic national sovereign as Israel is today. And that's why we have, political campaigns run by political parties to do so. Now, the problem is, and that's why that's the answer to your question about the turnout in the Arab community. The Arab community, Arab Palestinian community in Israel is not going to participate over the 45, 48% this time, because there is a growing group within this community that is not willing to accept the rules of the game. The rules of the game in the sense...
Yeah, Amal, please conclude at this point, if you don't mind.
Yeah, in two meanings. One, that Arab parties are not legitimate to be part of the coalition. This is one thing. And the second thing is that they have an impact on the political process, serious impact on the political process. And here the responsibility is located, put on the shoulders of the Arab leadership, in the sense that the turnout is dwindling because people are dissatisfied with the leadership finding the formula I spoke about before. And they want them to be more creative. Now, they want them to unite in order to have more impact. I think there is a rational choice or a strategic choice in the Arab Palestinian community saying that in order to have power, you need to have the most number of Arab Palestinian MPs in the Knesset, but not fragmented as the Jewish Zionist parties want them to be, but actually united, not from a sentimental point of view. It's not a romantic expectation. It's a very strategic point to be united in order to have the most impact possible, given the situation you described, Khalil, meaning that there are two camps fighting for legitimacy to form a government in the coming elections. It's the first time actually in Israel history, yes, and I think I don't agree with neither with Gideon nor with Hiba, because the Palestinians have decided to play the game. I think it's the first time for a long time, if not ever, that the Arab vote can have the most impact possible, but it is frustrated by the inability of the Arab leadership to agree to unite in one unit in order to have the greatest power possible. That's why people are frustrated. They don't have much expectation from the Zionist parties. They have expectations from their leadership, but their own leadership is not delivering enough. It doesn't mean it's not legitimate. It means that they want them to be responsive to the sentiments and to the strategic opportunity in their hands in order to enhance the impact on the decision making. The aim is to change the course of the ship. Is this possible?
Thank you.
Last sentence. Is this possible? Would this be allowed by the Zionist parties? I'm not sure. No, I'm not sure. But at least if we are playing the game, we should seize the opportunity to the end. Otherwise, they have to decide strategically whether it's worth to play the game or not. I think this is the question put on front of every Arab politician and everybody in the Arab Palestinian community today.
Thank you, Amal. Appreciate it. Orly, thank you for your patience. Last but not least, the microphone is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on this panel. I was going to talk about several points, but I think I will restrict my remarks to the implications of the elections towards the Palestinians and the occupation, the Palestinians in the occupied land, of course, which were not discussed yet so thoroughly. And of course, those policies depend on the results of the elections and the composition of the next government, which, as was already mentioned, is quite difficult to predict at this point. And I agree with Amal that the fate of the three Arab lists can really determine the political scene or the shape of the next government to one side or the other. Although the shape of the next government in Israel can vary along the range between a central left government, much similar to the one we see today, to a far right one with people like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the disciple of Meir Kahana, as main members in it. The range of the possible policies towards the Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories is not expected to be very wide, and I will try to very briefly explain why. In regards to the occupied territories, the current so-called government of change, which includes not only the Zionist left party Meretz, but also enjoys the support of the United Arab List, RAM, was, as Meretz member Mossi Raz himself admitted, the most extreme right-wing government to ever serve in Israel. To fully understand that statement, here are a few figures taken mostly from Peace Now's reports, summing up 1 year to the establishment of this government. Hiba mentioned a few of them. I will elaborate a little bit. Under the current center-left government, the number of Palestinians shot dead by the Israeli army in the Palestinian territories in the West Bank almost doubled, comparing to the annual average during Netanyahu's different administrations, and rose by 60% comparing to the year before the Bennett-Lapid government. House demolitions in the West Bank increased by 35%, in East Jerusalem by 59%, comparing to the annual average under Netanyahu. The settlements in the West Bank enjoyed an astonishing boost with 62% increase in new buildings compared to the preceding year, 26% increase in new plannings, and 15% increase in publishing new tenders for construction comparing to Netanyahu's annual average, to the annual average under all of Netanyahu's different governments. A sharp increase was also seen in the violent attacks against Palestinians by settlers, always, of course, accompanied by Israeli soldiers, and in the administrative detentions, which reached a 14-year record with 723 detainees right now. We are talking about the so-called center-left government, yeah? And of course, let us not forget that this government of change was the one to declare the most prominent Palestinian human rights organizations as terrorist group and persecuting them severely ever since. So those figures prove that even under the most moderate government that the Israeli political sphere can produce currently, and which will be composed more or less by the same actors, we are not expected to see any real change or improvement in the Israeli policies towards the occupied Palestinian territories. However, the policies can certainly take an even more dangerous and violent turn in the case of a full right-wing government with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir as permanent partners in it. Now, regarding those two, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, this two-headed monster, fascist monster that we've been facing, we should differentiate between them. While Itamar Ben-Gvir is primarily obsessed with entrenching Jewish supremacy inside the Green Line and marking the Palestinian citizens as the main enemy, we should keep in mind that Bezalel Smotrich, his partner, holds a very detailed and carefully articulated vision regarding the policies that Israel should promote in the West Bank. And they appear very clearly in his plan that was introduced, I think, in 2017 under the title The Plan of Defeat, or to put it more simply, the end game plan of Bezalel Smotrich. In very general lines, this plan talks about a total annihilation, a total erasing of any Palestinian national aspiration in the entire land between the river and the sea, claiming that, and I quote from the plan, only when one side will give up, willingly or by force, the idea to fulfill its national aspiration in the land of Israel, then the much needed peace will arrive and we will be able to live in civil coexistence. The operative plan to fulfill this vision, according to Smotrich, is to enforce Israeli sovereignty over the entire land, in other words, annexing the West Bank, and building massive new Israeli cities, pouring into them hundreds of thousands of Israelis in order to make the situation on the ground into an irreversible one. To the Palestinian residents, he presents two options: neglecting any national aspirations and live under Israeli regime as individuals, of course, without the right to vote for the Knesset, or to immigrate to another Arab country with an immigration grant that they will receive from the state. Anyone who will not comply with one of those options will be suppressed by unprecedented force. Now, I don't think it's very likely that this plan or even some of its main components will be adopted by Netanyahu as an official policy. We should keep in mind that during his long years as prime minister and with much more stable government, Netanyahu avoided annexing the West Bank, and there is no real reason to assume that he will do that now. But having said that, without a doubt, he will need to give Smotrich and his allies from the far right some tangible achievements in the occupied territories, including East Jerusalem, of course, in order to maintain the integrity of his government. And we all know the length that Netanyahu will go to in order to keep his position as prime minister. To my estimation, the most immediate meaning would be the acceleration of the crawling ethnic cleansing that has been going on for some years in the West Bank. There is a substantial reason to believe that communities under threat, such as Khan al-Ahmar or Susia, which are still standing mostly due to international political pressure and intervention, would be the first victims of the full right government that Netanyahu aspires to establish. Similarly, the ethnic cleansing in the Musafar Yatta area in South Hebron Hills is expected to accelerate as well. I think another interesting question is what will become of the Israeli cooperation with the Palestinian Authority, which, according to many Palestinians, serves mainly as a subcontractor of the occupation. Personally, I think that even though the Palestinian Authority represents the very national aspirations that Smotrich is so determined to eliminate, even a far-right government will not be able to allow itself to go too far in crushing the PA, because it needs it. It needs it for the security of the Israeli citizens. But of course, it will continue to empty it from any sovereign content, as has been done until today. And I know we are very short in time, so I will conclude in one paragraph, because there is another very meaningful actor that should be taken into account. And that is the Palestinian popular resistance to the occupation, as we see it these days very vividly in the areas of Jenin and Nablus. It is reasonable to assume that a far-right government would demand the aggressive oppression of any display of resistance, which in the current flammable situation could easily lead to another comprehensive uprising, another intifada, that we can see the signs of it already on the ground. And I would conclude with that for now.
Thank you, Orly. Appreciate it. We have quite a few questions, including one related to what you just mentioned. Briefly, do you expect those guys like Smotrich and Ben Gvir to be in a cabinet position in a Netanyahu government?
I think that to my personal estimation, if Netanyahu has the choice between composing a government with the far right, such as Smotrich and Ben Gvir, or to compose a government with more mainstream parties such as Gantz and his partners, he would prefer the latter, because not because he holds such highly values of democracy, but because Itamar Ben-Gvir is actually more threat to Netanyahu himself than anybody else. Netanyahu is not a revolutionary. Ben-Gvir is, and the first head he will go after on the way to his aspired revolution is Netanyahu's. So I think that if he has given the option, he would rather not to have them in his government.
Thank you, Orly. Gideon, is there sympathy for Russia's war in Ukraine among the right-wing parties in Israel? And is there a connection, kind of like, do these people want Russia to annex territories in Ukraine, to kind of apply that to Israel's case? This is a question from Wouter de Jong from Utrecht University in the Netherlands.
Yeah. So first of all, it's like many other serious topics, it is almost off the table. People discuss it very little. Our viewers must understand that the Israel discourse is right now superficial, ignorant, and deals really only with the most unimportant, ridiculous questions. Major principal questions are hardly discussed. And so is also the war in Ukraine. I think that Israel has a problem here, because as a veteran occupier, it's very hard for Israel to condemn Russia. On the other hand, people like me are quite surprised to see the world acting quite in a decisive way toward one occupation and being so indifferent and supportive to a very similar occupation with very similar justifications. If you listen to the Russian rhetorics, you hear the Zionist rhetorics. It's our land, there's no Ukrainian people, and so forth and so forth. Having said all this, Israel again, not the first time, is trying to eat the cake and leave it complete, to gain from both worlds. Exactly like Israel wants to be a democracy and still an occupier, exactly like Israel wants to be Jewish and democratic, Israel wants also to be a friend of the Russians and of the Ukrainians. In this case, unlikely the other cases that I mentioned, in this case, it might fail and Israel might lose both of them. Because if you don't take a very clear position, you see the Ukrainian anger at Israel, which is expressed again and again. Zelensky is almost compulsive in expressing how furious he is at Israel, rightly so. And I hope that the world, the Western world, who is really this time behaving in a quite extraordinary way, will note that Israel was not there with the West, with the United States, with the EU, when it was about, occupation or no occupation.
Thank you, Gidon. The next question is for Amal from our friend Maya Tabit at the Journal of Palestine Studies. How does the Islamist Party reconcile being part of a coalition government that stands for apartheid, discrimination, occupation, and continuous violence against the Palestinians? How do they justify that? Microphone.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Hello, Maya. Good to hear from you. A good question, of course. They put on hold their ideology. I mean, they are conservative, religious party, interested actually in their own worldview, and the only way to serve their own worldview, the Islamization of society, is by guaranteeing more resources from the state. They are actually following the Shah's party's path in Israel in order to play the game for the sake of gaining more resources from the state, in order to put in their education system and their health system, in supporting different communities in the Palestinian community in Israel, and thereby actually Islamize the community. I think this is the strategy. This is the long-standing strategy. Now, for that sake, they need to be as close as possible to decision-making and the allocation of resources. How they, reconcile it with their Islamic worldview, I think they have taken the wasati, what they call the wasati, the middle road in Islamic thought that we know from different Islamic minorities in non-Islamic states, and the Ash'ari, strategy of living, live and let live. Now, regarding apartheid, regarding the occupation, regarding siege on Gaza, and so on, they speak about clear priorities. They say we are elected by the Palestinians inside Israel. We are committed to their rights first, and then as much as we can do for the Palestinian people, we will do. Which means they change their priorities. I mean, if we look at the name of Hadash, the Communist Party, it's called the Democratic Front for Peace and Equality. Peace first, which means salam first, which means solving the Palestinian problem first in order to have equality inside Israel. They have changed the course. They are introducing a different strategy, saying we need to work for our own rights inside Israel, and let the Palestinians fight for their own Palestinians in the occupied territories in Gaza and outside Israel, fight for their own rights. This differentiation actually accepts or submits to the Israeli strategy of fragmenting the Palestinian people into different components, different parts that are not connected, and accept actually that for different Palestinians there are different political solutions. Actually, this is the point made by this party, and the way they talk to the public is by actually speaking in the name of gaining more civic rights and gaining more resources in order to solve the violence and crimes in the Arab community, and helping families to overcome the poverty threshold and solve their housing and planning problems and so on and so on. So they concentrate on civic issues for the sake of empowering the community, but not empowering the community in the general sense, but actually the Islamization of society. And this is an issue that does not gain enough attention in the discussion. That actually we are talking about different. It's not by occasion that Netanyahu preferred Mansour Abbas and his party to be a partner, because they don't want to have a say about the nature of Israel. They accept the nature of Israel as Jewish state. And Mansour Abbas said that clearly. He doesn't want to discuss this point.
Amal, is it easier for the likes of Netanyahu and Likud to deal with an Islamist Palestinian than with a nationalist Palestinian?
Yeah, of course, because the clash with the Palestinians is a national clash. It's a national conflict, and the only group that is demanding self-determination is the Palestinian people, not the Islamic nation. You know, the Israeli state looks at the Palestinians in Israel as different denominations: Muslims, Christians, Druze, and Bedouins, and so on and so on. This is the policy of fragmentation, and therefore they actually adopt the Israeli strategy of fragmentation and try to work out their own interests, their own worldview from within this framework, and thereby they submit to the strategy of fragmentation, and they justify it vis-a-vis their own constituency by bringing more resources for these poor who votes for the Islamic Party. I mean, if you look at the voters from the statistics we have, it's clear the main people who vote for the Islamic Party are villages in the Naqab in the south, and poor villages in the north, and some in the center. Conservative families who are mostly below poverty line, and therefore speaking to them, in the name of resources and infrastructures, works out. The national issue is not highlighted because they don't have a project for the national identity. They have a project for the Islamic nation, and this differentiation is actually the issue that has to be put up front by other Arab parties when they.
Thank you, Amal. Gidon, you want to add something? I hear you.
No, I would like just to. Joyce, I have to get into the studio now.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you so much for having me and for this very interesting panel, and to my friends Amal and Orly, obviously.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Orly, a quick question for you, and let's conclude with that. Are there any Jewish Israeli parties or individuals that openly basically call for or believe in a state where all Jews and Arabs are equal citizens? This is from Asbet Balanyan.
Well, I must say that it's a very understandable and yet a very sad question. I can understand why people would ask that, and the truth is that there are very, very few of us. I mean, the total of Jewish voters for the joint list in its different forms are I think at the top was several thousands, and Amal, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that it ever exceeded probably 2,000 or 3,000 for Hadash, and maybe a few hundreds for Balad. I myself was even a candidate on behalf of Balad, Tajamo, so I think that there are a few of us, and it is important, I think, that it also should be mentioned and should be acknowledged the effort that Tajamo, Balad, and Hadash are putting into talking to the Jewish audience, even though that doesn't bring them almost any voters at all, but because it's an ideological issue, and because the notion of full equality in a democratic state requires a dialogue with the Jewish citizens. They do that constantly, and I think that this is very admirable.
Thank you, Orly. We have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we are ran out of time. I just want to say to Kumkum Amin, who raised the questions for Hiba, since she's not with us anymore, had to leave early. I think you're right in terms of the impression you got as to how Palestinians in Israel like to identify themselves. I think Amal indirectly answered your questions in terms of the fact that they feel comfortable with their Palestinian identity. At the same time, what Amal announced, and I thank him for that, the beginning of a new phase in Arab-Israeli politics, which is the phase of impact. I think this notion deserves certainly a lot more attention from all of us in the future. So thank you to the hundreds of people who have joined us and have registered for this program, and who will see it again on our social media, as we will air it again multiple times. Thank you to the speakers. Excellent analysis. Thank you so much for taking time of your busy schedule, particularly on a busy week like this one, with regards to the pressures of the elections. And we look forward to additional programs in the future. Again, thank you, and on behalf of Arab Center, and we hope to see you at future events.